Right, thank you very much. Happy to talk to you here in my new life. So many of you will still know that until January this year, I was in the European Commission working on open access, but that life is past, and now I have partially a new job, and partially I also decided to be an independent and offer some consulting services. So we'll see what the take-up is. It's just my second week, so it's my first public appearance in this new job. And I want to go back a little bit. So first of all, this is not going to be about the Plan S. So, because I've been asked, oh, you're going to talk about the Plan S, so Robert Jan will do that tomorrow. So what I'm going to talk about is another aspect that I was previously involved in to a certain extent, namely the recommendation on access to and preservation of scientific information. So just to stress that as important as the Plan S is not the only European policy level initiative that exists. To recap a little bit, I did this slide also before the Plan S came out, so it's not here. We can say that we have a multi-level system in Europe of governance in general and specifically research policy and open access. We have activities on open access in the framework programs. You will know, and actually I would say if we have a little bit of a connection to the previous talk, I think in fact, and there maybe I'm still wearing half of my commission hat, I think the commission was also an early mover on open access. We already had an open access pilot in FP7, then we had Horizon 2020, and now we have Horizon Europe. You will maybe also it's of interest to look at what is foreseen in Horizon Europe. The Commission has a very ambitious proposal, but we now have to make sure that this in fact goes through the Parliament and the Member States in the Council. And then there is action on the Member States level, and there we have the 2016 Competitiveness Council conclusions, where in fact the Member States said we want to transition to open access by 2020. And then there are national actions and roadmaps in some countries, not all of them. And that is where the recommendation comes in. So the recommendation was first issued in 2012, when open access was maybe not as much known, and it contained a set of recommendations what member states should do at the time to implement open access. So it was addressed to the member states. And what it also did, it provided a basis for national self-reporting. So in the Commission, maybe you know, we were like 2 or 3 people looking at open access, which is not really enough to know what's going on in the member states. So we implemented these national points of reference, which is one representative from each member state to self-report on what is going on open access on the national level, and we collected those in the so-called NPR report. And the last one was in fact issued this year. So this gives you quite a nice overview, and I think it's one of these documents which are not really well known, where each member state thinks they are. So again, this is based on their own reporting. It's not us in the Commission who checks that. And I thought I'd summarize to you a little bit where the member states think they are. So they actually think, compared to 2012, progress has been made. So we are advancing towards open access, maybe slower than some people would like, but they say in most countries you can see at least slight improvement of the status, some with significant improvement. Well, Belgium and Romania as well has been the same, but actually none which have said, well, actually we are worse off than we were in 2012. Other key reports are that the recommendation in 2012 has been valuable in implementing open access. The majority of countries already have a policy or are discussing at the moment policies for open access. A key issue is, and we have heard this a little bit before, that okay, maybe on the policy level it's being discussed, but the individual researchers very often don't really know still what open access is and how it works. And that's probably also because we don't have enough rewards for open science, open access practices. So they are not implemented and integrated into career assessment. And that's probably a major weakness. Only half of the countries actually monitor the situation consecutively and check how many open access publications there are. And then there are also some issues that member states have flagged up with the big deals. What is the issue with this recommendation? Well, the issue is that it's just that. It's a recommendation. It's a soft law instrument. The Commission says, well, it would be nice if you would implement open access, but if a country does not implement open access, we cannot drag it before the Court of Justice, which we can in many other areas. But in research policy, we rely mostly on soft law. The interesting thing, the good thing is, I would say that in many cases nowadays, the member states, they are a bit skeptical when it's about Commission action. Say, no, Commission, we do this on our own. But in fact, for open access, we asked the member states, well, would you think it would be valuable to move towards harder policy, away from this soft policy of a recommendation? And you can see that quite a lot of countries, in fact, said yes. If you look very closely, you'll find some countries which aren't even members of the EU. You see here Turkey. So in case you're wondering about that, the recommendation is a document which is relevant to all countries also which have association agreements with the EU. But there are also, of course, some countries that say no. And why do they say no? So my colleagues looked a bit more closely on that. Some countries that say no say, well, actually in my country, we already have a very strict policy. We don't need a harder one. Others say, well, it's in fact too early to tell. We need more time for the transition. And, but all countries agree that better communication and sharing of best practices is needed. And again, there is this issue of the low awareness, what open access is and how it works. So the Commission, when it was reviewing this recommendation of 2012, and for me, so since I'm now independent, I can say it, I think it was a mistake that we did not move to harder legislation. And I tried this for, to push a little bit at my time, but it wasn't really possible. So instead of doing something, a decision or another form of hard legislation, they decided to update the recommendation. So it's a technical update, and it's basically the one thing that I find is quite interesting is that in the previous recommendation, it's one minute. Okay, in the previous recommendation, we said basically you should monitor what is going on in your country, and now the Commission is saying actually you should really develop concrete plans to implement the Council decisions. And then it also updates some of the policy developments, the cloud, fair data, and all of that. And with that, I think I talked very fast to be in my 8 minutes, and I leave you with the links to these documents because I could only give a very short summary, but I think these are in fact quite useful documents to know what is going on in each country, and the documents contain that to a much larger extent than I could present here. So I was told I have time for one question and the rest over the reception.
So what do scientists download? We hear every time that there are preprints, you do not need journals anymore, and the solution to all levels of the world is to have preprints all over the place, or maybe the solution to all levels of the world is to have open access journals all over the place. So we have done one thing, which is to take a data set where we have exactly the count of the downloads to the same thing when it is a preprint, when it is an article published in a closed access journal, or when it is an article published in an open access journal. So you are going to find the answer to all your questions now. You might have heard that particle physicists do preprints. Up here you have the percentage of a journal in high energy physics, which is a preprint, which starts at 20% in 1992, and after 3 years it's 50%, and after 5 years it's 100%. Now if 100% of your journal is open access for like 25 years, it means that if you take all articles ever written in particle physics starting from 1945, 60% of them, that's a lower curve, are in a preprint now. So it means that anything you might want to read written from 1945 to today, 60% of that is available on archive as a preprint. So the question is relevant. When somebody has to read something, what do they read? Now, I don't know what do they read, but I can tell you what they download. How close a download is to a read, I think we need a conference to establish. So we have been working very closely with the archive, Elsevier and Springer Nature, and we have been able to find an agreement where we would get the entire downloads of 6 months, in 2 shots of 6 months, I will explain later, in 2013 and 2016 from archive, from 2 journals in high energy physics from Springer Nature, and 2 journals in high energy physics from Elsevier. Now the Springer Nature journal and the Elsevier journals together is over half of what is published every year in high energy physics. So these numbers matter. So what we did was to take all the downloads on archive, all the downloads on Springer Nature and Elsevier, we threw everything away, apart from keeping the downloads exactly to the same thing. So we have a preprint, which is published. We count for every single day how many times the preprint is read, download, sorry, how many times that preprint after becomes an article is downloaded on one of the publisher platforms. And now you're about to know what people read. Download. So this is the average number of downloads per paper per month. There are no units for, we didn't manage to find an agreement in publishing the units on the downloads, so there are no units, but it's normalized as we say in physics. So this means that that's when something gets published. So 6 months before something gets published can only be downloaded from archive, and that's the blue thing, the floor above us. After something gets published, it gets downloaded either a preprint on archive or in an average subscription journal, which can be either the 2 titles from Springer Nature or the 2 titles from Elsevier. And what happens is that things get downloaded twice as often on the archive than they get on a subscription journal. That's a plot done for 2013 downloads when journals were only under subscriptions. Since it is about 20 years we have archive, we can do the same for content which is 5 years old, or for content which is 10 years old. So even for the back files, you see that particle physicists go to archive twice as often to download than they go to a publisher platform. This is when the world was closed, but then something happened.
Thank you. Then scope 3 happened. It's actually a nice flow that I don't go represent the future. Scope 3 happened in 2014. And I don't want to give you another scope 3 talk because many of you have heard it before. Salvatore and me keep coming back to course to talk about it. But it's important to understand what has changed to understand the next slides. So at the 1st of January 2014, we flipped those 4 journals, the 2 Elsevier journals, the 2 Springer Nature journals, from a subscription world immediately, from one day to the other, to a gold open access journal. So all the content suddenly was freely available. We also support a couple of more journals individually for our articles that are relevant for the discipline. In total, we cover now about 90% of all the journal articles in our discipline. Just very briefly, we do this centrally. And that's one of the key things that we are very proud of. We centrally deal with publishers. We enter into contracts with participating publishers, and these contracts basically say 3 things. 1, everything has to be immediately open access, everything which matters to us, high energy physics. 2, we centrally pay for that, so the researchers shouldn't be bothered. They don't even sometimes know that we exist because miraculously, suddenly, the articles are open access. And 3, the publisher has to reduce the subscription fees accordingly, either entirely remove it for the journals that we flipped fully or proportionally reduce it. On the other side, we have then 3,000 members that CERN has an agreement with, and they use the savings that they have on their subscriptions to give it to us in a central fund from which we then can pay our contracts with the publishers. And it's important to note that about 3/4 of the money that we need came from those 3,000 libraries. And then we have some funding agencies that support, and CERN puts a little bit in as well, so that we in total then have the funds available. So keep in mind, from one day to the other, we flipped those 4 journals. Then we have a very similar chart with suddenly 2 lines for the journals. The lower blue part was basically the same thing that you saw before. The downloads of articles from those 4 journals when they were still in the subscription world in 2013. Then we took the same journals and calculated the average number of downloads per article after they suddenly became open. And you see the articles are at the beginning almost 4 times more often downloaded from the journal than it was before in the subscription world. And even if you go a bit into some older content, it's still 3 times or at least 2 times more that we see downloads from those same journals from before and after Scope 3, subscription and open access.
The first time I presented this plot, I was shouted at because I said that we were successfully killing archive. So we entrenched the role of publishers in their grotesque profits. Instead, this is not what happened, because that's now the plot where you have everything together. So you have what has happened from 2013 to 2016 in archive. Downloads for these articles in this discipline went up 60%. The entire downloads to archive went up 60%. So that's not changed. And what you see instead that open access journals have caught up with archive interchangeably. So what happened is that we sort of baked a bigger pie, and there are more things being downloaded. But the most incredible thing which has happened has been for us to just look in this data that we got, which also included the back files. So we were about to throw everything away, and then we checked this. Now, you have only to look at 2 lines. The yellow line down here is how many downloads you got of content in 2013 from subscription closed content. The red line there, the one with all these arrows, I cannot see colors, the red one there with all the arrows is the line of what happens to the download of subscription closed content after some of the content has gone open. That also has gone up by a factor 3. So what happens is that eyeballs which were no longer coming to the publisher platforms because they were going to archive have come back to the publisher platform by reading content which was open, and they found the closed one as well. And I ran out of time.
Hello, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about Scilit. I should first mention that I'm just a messenger here. The guy who's really done the work on this project is Bastien Latar, who's a very talented PhD student who's now doing some research with using Scilit content, and you'll understand hopefully by the end of this talk what he might be doing. A couple of questions for you. I should mention the formatting of the slide is slightly different from what I submitted, but anyway. So where can you search for open access content for free? If you want to go looking for open access papers, where do you go? And secondly, how do you know who's publishing what? How do you know what the publishing market looks like? Who's publishing how many journals, how many papers, how many of those are open access, and so on? Well, you might have your own answers to those questions. Here's what I came up with. So you might look at the directory of open access journals. They do a tremendous job in terms of adding open access content. There is a delay there because not all open access publishers have yet registered or been approved by DOAJ. You might look at PubMed Central, which is very much focused on the life sciences. There's other similar repositories. If you want to look at just open access content, Google Scholar, for example, doesn't have a filter for just open access. I think similarly for Microsoft Search, although I haven't checked that recently, and then Scopus or Web of Science you'd have to pay for. If you want to look at the publishing market, you might want to pay for a very expensive market research report, or just put the hours in. And I don't know if you've ever been to a publisher website and tried to work out how many papers they've published. It's not so straightforward. So we wanted to answer those questions and a few others. And we put together this database called Scilit. So as input, we're taking data from various sources. So from Crossref is a very important source for us, PubMed as well, and then a few other sources, including publisher websites, and we're kind of expanding these sources as time goes on. Put those all into our database, and on the output side, on the right-hand side, you can go to our website, scilit.net, and you can put in some keywords or author names and see what comes up. And then also on the same site, we have information about the publishing market. So you can see This example is maybe a bit small, but it's the top 5 publishers by the number of open access articles. And you can see the top 100, or you can search for a publisher, see how many journals they publish, how many of those are open access, and the same with their articles as well. There's a few other projects that we're kind of powering with Scilit. So citations is one of those. And if an author publishes with MDPI, then they cite another article, then we'll have a look in Scilit, see if we can find the email address of the corresponding author of that article and write to them and say, hey, someone's just published an article and cited your work. Researchers love that kind of thing, and we have a very low unsubscribe rate on that service. We also, within our submission system, we also use it as a reviewer finder. So again, you can put some keywords in if take a few words out of the abstract, and it will pull out people who've published on that topic recently. You can see what they've published, when they've published it, where they've published, and decide, okay, would this person possibly be a suitable reviewer for this paper? And we can also do that for conflicts of interest, finding previous co-authors and things like this. A few of the features of Scilit. So yeah, big flashing lights. I should have scilit.net. That's the website to go to. So Scilit is fully automated. There are obviously upsides and downsides to that. The downsides are that it's not curated in any way, although we do what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of duplicate checking. But the advantage is that we're very comprehensive. So we're basically taking everything that we can find. When I say everything, I mean specifically research articles. So we're not covering kind of grey matter and data sets, things like this, patents, those kind of things. Research articles and preprints is what we're focused on. And yeah, we can get content online within a few hours. Normally, if it's submitted to Crossref, it will appear on Scilit very shortly afterwards. It's free to search, and what might also be interesting for people in this room is that you can create a free publisher account. So you can complete a short sign-up form, and then you can check what data we've got from your journals on Scilit. And if you want to push information to us as well, we can arrange that. And then very importantly, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a filter for open access content. So we're doing this obviously on a journal level, but also on an article level as well. So we're trying to pick up hybrid articles. I can't say this is perfect, but we're doing our best. We're looking for things like license information on the abstract page about licensing data and within the metadata as well. So far we got about 111 million articles on there, 21 million full text articles, and about 2 million preprints. Yeah, a few of the latest developments. So we're still kind of actively developing Scilit. So as I mentioned a moment ago, we've got full text articles there. So you can download the PDF or HTML or whatever we find directly from Scilit, and we're doing this using data from Core, collaboration with Unpaywall, PubMed Central, preprint websites, and we're adding, this is somewhere where we're adding sources of full text articles. Automatic detection of corrections and retractions. And the other thing I forgot to put on the slide, but the last talk prompted me as well, is we're also adding links between preprints and published articles as well. So if you search and you find a preprint and there's a published version, there will be a banner at the top that says, hey, there's a published version of this article. You can go to that one as well. A couple of things coming soon. We'll have a reference management tool. So something like EndNote, Zotero, Mendeley. You can download a formatted reference that you can paste straight into Word or LaTeX or whatever you're using. And also we have publisher accounts. We'll also have author accounts with something called SciProfile. So yeah, thanks for your attention, and let me know if there's any questions.
Hi, Ilke Fuerda from OAPEN. What's the connection with MDPI? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Partly because we can, and there was a moment. I think one of the triggers a few years ago was when DOAJ became unavailable for a few months, and we realised that there was really a gap for people locating our content and the content of other open access publishers. We are also, we find it very useful internally for the tools that I mentioned, like finding reviewers. We use this all the time. You know, we have a lot of editors finding reviewers with this, so it's very valuable. And now it's set up, we don't have to pay a third party for access to that kind of database. And we also, we get benefits from it internally, and we also think it's a useful resource for the community.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks very much to the organisers for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about FREYA. It's not specifically for publishers, but for this audience, so yes. So Project FREYA is a 3-year project that's funded by the European Commission under the Horizon 2020 programme, and is a follow-on from Project Thor, so many of you might have heard of that. And it started in November last year, so we've been going for several months. FREYA's overall goals, people have been asking me, well, this is it in writing, and I'll expand a little bit, to iteratively extend a robust environment for persistent identifiers into a core component of European and global research e-infrastructures. So that's quite a mouthful. But really what we're trying to say there is that in this age of great data production and research outputs, we want to have reliably traceable and connected research records, and this is where persistent identifiers step in. The ones that you'll probably be very familiar with are DOIs for articles and data sets, and ORCID IDs for researchers. So with that in mind, really the aim of the FREYA project is to see persistent identifiers adopted by researchers across disciplines, and as an essential part of sharing and preserving their work. And that way we'll allow for greater discoverability and sharing and, discovery. So the partners, the FREYA team is made up of big data partners across Europe and the UK, and we've even got some USA partners as well as an Australian partner, and you'll recognize many of the names here. Together, what we're trying to do in the next 3 years is a program of work that's divided into work packages that are addressing the following things. So improving and harmonizing existing PID services, and linking them up, providing graphical representations of the persistent identifier graph. We're wanting to develop and deliver new PID services and types that would meet the needs of researchers and scholars. Engagement, so building a community that will talk about persistent identifiers, test them for us, and use them. And in that regard, we're hoping to work very closely with the RDA to build that community. And sustainability, so establishing open and inclusive governance structures that would allow us to have these PID services that we build and develop to continue beyond the life of the project. So we're hoping to provide services within EOSC, and also to work with research infrastructures like OpenAIRE and others. So, FREYA in practice, I wanted to spend a tiny bit of time talking about FREYA in practice at the EBI. So, as we mentioned earlier, I'm representing the life sciences, just little old me, the life sciences through the EBI and EMBL. And what you probably all know is that we are famous for loads of databases at the EBI, protein and DNA databases with lots of accession numbers. And so I wanted to talk about two services that are based at the EBI that deal with these accession numbers. So the first is identifiers.org. And what happens with identifiers.org is that they've developed a common registry of prefix-based redirection rules to enable any identifier to be to be traced back to its source on the web. And so this is an identifier from 600 source databases. So it's a very useful service for publishers and others who are wanting to achieve machine resolvable citation of research data. I can tell you a bit more about that. That's really quite a mouthful in a short time. But what I'd like to dwell on a bit more is Europe PMC. So the last talk I mentioned PMC. So Europe PMC was developed in partnership with PMC USA. And what we have is shared content. So on the left-hand side of that circle, we share abstracts, full text articles, only a proportion of which, by that funny little U sign that got destroyed in the transfer of these slides, only a proportion of which are open access. Then on the right-hand side, we've got Europe PMC only content, which represents patents and clinical guidelines, and more recently, we've added preprints from about 5 different preprint organizations through cross-ref identifiers. So what we have in total here is about 34 million pieces of content. That is quite a big core of life sciences content. But what I want to tell you is that we add value to this core content by the connections we make with these other entities, like ORCID IDs for researchers. We add detailed grant information. Ooh, it's all changed. The F was a euro sign. We provide article level citations. We generate links to data and also text mined for annotations. And this slide is to really show you how complex and how much bigger the network becomes when you add in the size of those connections. So just to dwell on a few things, if you have a look at the ORCID identifiers, we have 5.6 million pieces of content linking out to 800,000 unique ORCID IDs on Europe PMC. The other one I want to point out is the biostudies link. So biostudies is another database based at the EBI that can be considered a data container. So there we can accumulate the data behind any article, so supplementary material, and with it text mined accession numbers to publicly available data repositories. And it all gets stored in one place. So it's like the end of supplemental material. And we're really looking to push this with publishers. If you're interested, I'd be happy to talk with you afterwards. But what it ends up with is we have 1.1 million Europe PMC records that now also have a biostudies record. And that's where you can link to it in Europe PMC via the abstract. And the other powerful set of links is to annotations, and these are text-mined terms, biological terms like genes, proteins, and diseases, protein-protein interactions, all of those things which we link then to data sets in public repositories. And those number 500 million plus, which, a little anecdote, is more than the number of variations in the human genome. So I'm trying to display by this slide how rich the core data can be when you link it to other identities. And this linking, the solid arrows, indicates where we've used persistent identifiers to make those links. So I've just really focused on one user story, and that is where's the data behind the paper here. And this is a very life sciences focused example of FREYA in action. All of the other partners that I mentioned are approaching the FREYA project from their perspective. We're trying to collect user stories at FREYA at the minute. And so, for example, as a biologist, I want to reuse and remix my data so that I can do my research. That's an example of a user story, but we'd love to hear your user stories if you'd like to submit them. I'd also like to encourage you to get involved in FREYA. If you're interested in persistent identifiers and have the capacity to engage with your communities and encourage uptake, we have resources on our website. You can become an ambassador. We have a competition which can send you to Padapalooza in Dublin in January, so please get involved. That's also been messed up a little bit, but you can find me in the audience, and also my colleague Maria Levchenko from Europe PMC is here in the audience if you have any specific questions on that. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'd start off with a quick show of hands, please. Who here thinks that preprints are a good idea? Okay, I think definitely easily the majority. Who thinks that open peer review, and especially in terms of publishing peer reviews alongside articles, is a good idea? Okay, also very, very good. Okay, I'm not here to change your opinion on this because I don't have time, okay? But scholarly publishing is changing in a lot of ways, and we talk about how we're stuck with the PDF and nothing is changing, but things are changing. And a couple of the things that are really changing is uptake of preprints and open peer review. And what I want to highlight here is that the levels of uptake are not always clear for these practices, and the policies and practices are not always clear. So for researchers going to journal websites, what the actual policies are is not always clear. And to take kind of an overview, how many journals do open peer review, for instance, this is also really difficult to answer. There was a report that used Publon's data, but Publon's only has the data for the journals that have agreed to be in Publon's, and this isn't actually always open peer review. There are journals which are closed peer review, which allow you to publish the content of your report on Publon's. So, and this is bad because this can be a deterrent for people interested in embracing these practices. If you want to submit to your prestige journal and you're not sure what the preprint policy is, or if you want to try open peer review and you can't find a journal, for instance, and plus it's difficult to track trends over time. Okay, so the momentum for open peer review. So in February of this year, there was a meeting in the States, organized by ASAP Bio, HHMI, and the Wellcome Trust, on the theme of peer review. And there was really a consensus that built. The publishing peer review, I mean, it was kind of a biased audience. I think it was people interested in that stuff. And if you'd ask other people from other parts of the publishing houses, you might get a different answer. But most of the people there thought publishing peer reviews was a good idea. And so as part of that, Jessica Polka and colleagues from HHMI and Wellcome recently published an open letter calling for the publication of peer review reports as a comment piece in Nature, and they're now asking for journals to sign up to this open letter. Another issue is that came up at that meeting was recognizing ghost peer reviewers. So I'm sure a lot of you might be familiar with this. So the PI or the professor or the prestige individual gets the review invitation. They don't have time for it. They pass it on to their postdoc. This is training for the postdoc. But then they pass the review back on, and the editor isn't aware who has actually done this, and the individual doesn't get credit with the editor, or in an open peer review system doesn't get credit online. And there was an eLife survey on this quite recently, and it showed that I'll move on. And then finally, momentum for preprints. There is information about preprints in Sherpa Romeo, but that is preprints in the sense of does it comply with embargoes? So it doesn't necessarily say if I can post it before or after publication. And also there's information there that isn't missing, which version can be posted, which are acceptable preprint servers, can preprints be cited in papers, what's the preprint media coverage policy. This is all important information for people who might want to take up these practices, and it's also good information for us to have to get a view of what the landscape looks like at the moment. So, our idea is that to effectively track and advocate for more transparent peer review practices, we need to make these practices visible. And so me and a few others, including Jessica Polka of ASAP Bio, Gary McDowell of Future of Research, and others, have started an initiative called TRANSPOSE, the aim of TRANSPOSE is basically to crowdsource a database of these journal policies across these key areas, so ghost reviewing, open peer review, and preprint policies. So far, we've taken part in a Moz sprint and managed to get some crowdsource engagement that way. But now we would like to ask, particularly the publishers and your editorial staff, if you could come and actually, because since you're the people who know the policies of your journal best, if you could come and contribute to the website, to the database. I should say that in 2 weeks, our team, most of the people listed as contributors here will be going to the Scholarly Communications Institute. This is this annual event where you can apply and they give you money basically to put your team all together in a room for a week. And so there hopefully we'll have a sprint and which will be very visible online, and we'll invite you all to take part then. So I realize now I didn't put my email address on here. I have lots of business cards though, or you could just Google any of us and we'll be happy to get in touch with you. So, I'm early.
Any questions?
Stuart Taylor from the Royal Society. Thanks very much for that, Tony. Certainly be getting in touch with you about our journals because we have 4 open peer review journals at the Royal Society. Worth mentioning also that there's a very good Wikipedia page listing journal preprint policies. So any publishers who want to make sure their entry's correct or included should go to that. Not to undermine what you're doing, obviously, but there is a resource for preprint policies of journals.
Yeah, I mean, this I think Jessica Polka's contributed quite a lot to that.
Yeah, she has.
And this originally was her idea. Her idea was rather than having a Wikipedia page, have a Wikidata page, which then, for various reasons, is basically a souped-up Google sheet that we have at the moment. But yes, of course. I forgot to say something. So in spring of this year, I was greatly privileged to become editor-in-chief of an MDPI journal called Publications. Please submit. But especially at the end of this month, we're going to publish a special issue, me and a couple of colleagues, friends, on the theme of new frontiers in openness for scholarly publishing. So look out for that. This is also related to these themes. And if you would like to, if you have an idea for that, then please come and see me over drinks or whenever. Thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you for this opportunity. It is a great honor for me to speak to you here at the 10th Conference on Open Access Scholarly Publishing. My name is Mayya Revzina, and for the 9 last years I have been leading the Rights and Licensing program at the World Bank. I first joined the World Bank in 2007 as a summer intern, and at that time I came to Washington DC straight from London, where I was studying publishing as a British government chevening scholar from Russia. I wanted to become a professional rights manager, and this brought me to the open access movement. So what is the World Bank as an institution and a publisher? The World Bank, or the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, is an intergovernmental organization which is owned by the governments of its 189 member countries. The World Bank provides low-interest loans and other financial and technical assistance to developing countries. And as a research institution, the World Bank also facilitates the global exchange of knowledge. And this is why it is a knowledge bank and an open access publisher. We publish the most important research outputs of the institution in many areas and topics. Our publications are mostly on developing countries, and 58% of our readers come from developing countries. We publish overall about 100 books a year. Our publishing model includes both free and priced products, and it shifted towards open access in 2012. It is important to mention that the World Bank wears 2 hats, that of the publisher and that of the author. From the copyright perspective, the work of bank researchers belongs to the World Bank as an institution, as an employer. And the World Bank concludes agreements with scholarly publishers to allow bank researchers publish in academic journals and books. This unique situation of being the publisher and the author at the same time gives us a unique perspective and unique opportunities in the open access world. Things started changing dramatically for the institution in 2010, when it was officially recognized that the multipolar world requires multipolar knowledge. And the bank had a role to play, first and foremost by opening its research and knowledge resources to the world for free, for everyone to access and to use without restrictions. In April 2010, the World Bank launched its open data policy. In July 2010, the access to information policy. In April 2012, the open knowledge repository. And finally, in July 2012, the open access policy mandated that World Bank publications must be made available to the world under the most liberal Creative Commons attribution license. And because bank researchers also publish in scholarly literature and academic journals, the open access policy also mandated that such externally published research must be made available to the public as well. We negotiated and concluded agreements with 14 academic publishers with whom bank researchers publish most frequently. And these include Oxford University Press, Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, Wiley, Springer Nature, Cambridge University Press, MIT Press, and others. These agreements allow bank researchers to publish journal articles and in some cases book chapters in compliance with the open access policy following the green open access route. In general, we found it difficult to get publishers to agree to allow us make the author-accepted manuscript, not to mention the published version of record, available to the public immediately and under CC BY license. However, publishers had no objection to us making the preprint or the working paper version available to the public under CC BY. So we stuck to this two-stage approach, whereby we make the preprint or the working paper available under CC BY immediately, and then the author-accepted manuscript following embargo if required by the publisher, and usually under CC BY and C and D. And we shared this experience in the report published by Core Open Access Agreements and Licenses Task Force, which I was a proud member of. Because we are the publisher, we understand very well the importance of changing the institutional culture. We understand that it is our responsibility to make open access attractive to our researchers. So this slide summarizes what we have done for our authors. In the Open Knowledge Repository, we have created author profiles to help our authors reach their audiences and also measure the impact of their research. We revisited the institutional copyright policy and in 2015 issued a new copyright directive focusing on open access, public licensing, digital media, and collaboration. We educate our researchers about open access and copyright. In 2017, we launched the Copyright Coffee series at the World Bank Group Library, which turned to be very popular and consistently has the rating of 5 in the World Bank Learning Catalog. We not only concluded institutional agreements with scholarly publishers, but also created an infrastructure to help our authors understand these agreements and use them conveniently. And perhaps most importantly, we have created a culture in which they trust us to be a valuable source of knowledge and help when publishing externally. And because we are a collective author, we also worked a lot with scholarly publishers to inform them about our policies and to explain our legal requirements, which can be quite specific because we are an intergovernmental organization. Many of the publishers with whom we concluded institutional agreements deliver the metadata of the articles they publish to us, and some publishers also deliver either the accepted author manuscripts or the published version of record, depending on the agreement. I mentioned that the World Bank is an intergovernmental organization, and some of you probably know that there are many of us out there, and we work together to promote our policies and publishing practices. In collaboration with Creative Commons, we have created the IGO version of Creative Commons suite of licenses, which best protects IGOs from legal risks. The IGO Open Licensing Working Group currently encompasses 20 plus members, and we meet regularly to exchange experiences. I noticed that some publishers have recently started using the term IGO in their agreements, and I think this is a great idea. I would like to express my support to this initiative, because this helps them to use one and the same template when working from authors from different intergovernmental organizations which have similar policies and legal standing. Of course, there can be nuances, but in general, I think this is a very good beginning. So what are the overall results of our efforts? Apparently, the World Bank is seen as a more human, open, and accountable organization now that everyone can use our content without asking for permission for any good purpose. Our openness was designed for good actors, and in spite of some initial concerns, we have not come across any case of our content being used in a way that would make us regret our decision. And what comes next for us? My project for this year is to synchronize the licenses the World Bank uses for its data and for its publications, so that our users can easily remix our content with our data and with other open content. And of course, the other goal is to intensify education and collaboration within the institution and externally. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be happy to speak with you at any other time, and hopefully we have a minute for questions.
Hi, thanks, very interesting. I'm just wondering whether there are any significant differences between the CC BY license and the IGO license, because this came across my desk a couple of weeks ago when it also requested the IGO license instead of CC BY.
This is a great question, thank you very much.
Probably very difficult to answer in 30 seconds.
Interrelation is slightly different. The Creative Commons suite of licenses as it exists in any version has 6 different licenses. CC BY is the most liberal one, and then we go to CC BY and CND, which is the most restrictive. This is the same for the IGO licenses, except that they are not version 4, 3, or 2, they are version 3.0 IGO. So CC BY 3.0 IGO exists as well as CC BY 3.0 IGO and CND. I hope this answers your question.
Hi, Mayya. My name is Pablo, and I have a quick question. You mentioned that 50% of your readers come from developing countries, right?
58.
50.
58%.
58%.
Yes. If I said 50, sorry, that's just...
No, it's okay. No, maybe. So what I wanted to understand is, I know maybe this is outside the rights conversation we are having here, but I wonder if the World Bank tracks how that content is being used, how these readers are engaging with that content, are they sharing, how they are sharing forward. That will be very interesting too, because I realize that a lot of discussion we are having here is mostly pre-publication, and I'm really curious what's happening after publication of all this open access content.
We can track it to a certain extent, and this is why we have the Open Knowledge Repository, which allows us to see how many downloads of which publications in which countries have been downloaded, read, shared, etc. However, at the same time, the whole idea of open access was to share and not to monitor or control. So we don't have any facilities beyond that, and we think it's okay. We want the world to use our content without us knowing about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayya. Thank you.